Please be seated, everyone. The record should reflect that the jury is back in the courtroom. Dr. Gurr, I remind you that you're still under oath. Okay. And Mr. King, you may proceed with the rest of your direct examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Gurr, you told us about your research and your teaching and your publications and your honors that you've received. Now, are you trained as a forensic psychiatrist?
I'm not.
Why not?
Well, we have to make choices in life, professionally, and my choice was to go through what I call sometimes the cynic route of doing neurology and psychiatry and dedicating my efforts to clinical research in schizophrenia.
What crowd did you say?
Scenic route. I call it a long road.
Oh, the scenic route.
Scenic route, yeah, a long road of many years in school.
I thought you were saying the cynical route.
No.
That's
no.
the route I took.
No. I'm sorry.
So it's been a long process. Is that
Long
what
process,
you're saying?
yes.
And in all seriousness,
Yeah.
We're here in front of this jury, and you've been qualified as an expert to give your opinions. Isn't it significant that you're not a forensic psychiatrist? I mean, shouldn't that be taken into consideration?
I think that the opinion, it's a fair question, the opinion that I've been asked to render was the clinical status of the diagnosis of Mr. Holmes based off my clinical experience of evaluating many individuals, many people over the years, all the information that is presented, available to me, gathered in the process of the investigation, and to assess if during the act of the crime that he has committed, he was insane. And I believe that based on the expertise that I have and my clinical experience and the process that I followed, I was able to evaluate it and render my expert opinion. So I do not think that it is necessary to be a forensic psychiatrist for that. A highly knowledgeable and qualified, educated clinical person with vast experience can provide the lawyers, the court, the jury with information that can be relevant.
Now, is it your understanding that some of the things that forensic psychiatrists study and work on are things like how to testify in court, how to write a report for the judge, how to list the materials that you've reviewed, things like that?
Oh yeah, I'm aware of it, yes. That the type of report that will be provided by a forensic psychiatrist is different than the type of report that will be provided by me, and I've labeled my report accordingly, neuropsychiatric evaluation report. I never present myself as a forensic psychiatrist, and my reports are briefer, but I believe that the type of the information that I gather is done systematically, and I provide the clinical picture as I see it in relationship to thousands of people with schizophrenia that I've seen over the years.
And that kind of leads into my next question, which is, do you think that, and I asked this same question about the other psychiatrists as well, and that is, is that interviewing a patient, specifically a patient who may be psychotic, kind of a skill that you learn by doing it over time? Do you get better at doing that over time? And if so, how?
Each person, in my experience, each person with psychosis presents a challenge. While there are common features that we always, which is an effort that we try to do in order to characterize and diagnose, the background, the way they present, the way you establish rapport and interact with them can be very different and challenging, and depends on many, many factors, including the age of the individual who is being interviewed, the setting, what is the clinical status, how do they perceive me when I interview them, and this is a skill that I've learned over the years to perform, and I believe, from feedback that I get, that I do it well, that I'm able to obtain information from them, even when it's difficult.
And is that a function of how many psychotic people you talked to over the years, in part, along with your expertise and your knowledge of how the brain works? Partly
is that. It's just like anything else. The more you do it, the better you get at it, especially when you get feedback from supervisors, teachers, colleagues that observe. And partly, I think that when we choose what we do within psychiatry, some people would rather not work with people who have schizophrenia or are psychotic. They're more inclined to work with people who are depressed, for example. So they might be more inclined to work with people of post-traumatic stress disorder, more in the veteran administration setting. So each one of us finds the area that we believe we can do well, and that we can contribute, and that we can make progress. And so it's skills that you hone, but also some level of being able to relate to people that many times are far out there and that are different than most of the people that you encounter in everyday life.
How many people with serious mental illness, psychotic illnesses, have you interviewed in your career? Can you estimate?
I was saying, almost too many to count, because, we see so many people in our center annually. And when I was in the inpatient unit and attending, I will interview every person who came in, and most of the people who were admitted or committed against their will were psychotic. So I've seen, maybe 1,000 is too much, I want always to be accurate, but hundreds, if you think over the many years that I've practiced, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. And I've seen people in state hospital. In the past, I trained residents in state hospital, so lots of them.
And based upon the feedback that you've received that you just were talking about, have you a reputation, if you will, in your community as being someone who has an extraordinary skill in interviewing psychotic people and getting information that other psychiatrists have a difficulty getting? Not to brag on yourself, but I'm the one asking the question.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I don't want to brag, but the answer is yes. So I will be able to interview a patient clinically, and the psychiatrist who went over it before will be amazed at how much I could get out of the person. Yeah.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about, because you said that, you never, did you ever intend to do forensic work? Did you ever think in your career you'd be in this scenario?
No,
Did you ever want to be in this scenario? Is it
No.
a desire of yours?
no.
Has it kind of fallen in your lap because of the expertise that you've developed over the years?
Yes, I've been approached. I've never asked or requested or pursued being involved in forensic cases. I've been approached about it, and many times disagreed to participate.
Now, does that happen to you all the time, that people ask you to become involved in cases and you'd have to turn it down, or how frequent is that?
I don't have a log of it. It doesn't happen all the time, because most people know that most of the time I will say no, I don't even return calls at time and ask my assistant to say that I'm not interested, because there's so many hours a day and you have to choose what you do.
I want to talk to you in a minute about the cases that you have been involved in. But first, how do you then decide when you get the call if it's something that you would be willing to involve yourself in, or if it's something you're just going to say no to? Do you want to know a little bit about the case to begin with, or the individual that's involved to begin with, or what's your thought process on that?
So I want to know a little bit about the case, so that I can gauge if this is something that I might have expertise. So, for example, if it will be a case of somebody who is using substances, my major expertise is not in substance abuse, but although people with schizophrenia can abuse substances, I will defer it. It will be relatively easy for me to recommend somebody else. Or if it's in the case of mood disorder, bipolar disorder, I will refer to somebody else. So I gauge to see, based on the information available, is this something that I believe I have the expertise and can provide information that will enable the court to incorporate it.
Now, that sounds a little to me like you're prejudging the cases, or you're pre-diagnosing schizophrenia in the case before you've seen anything or seen the patient. Is that what we're talking about here?
No.
What do you do? What do you do then?
So I get information that is available and can be discussed with me about the background of the case, the person, and as much information as is available at the time. Many times it can be early in the course. And then if I think that based on the early information that this is something that I might be able to evaluate and say that this person might or might not have schizophrenia. I don't come into the case or any clinical with a presumptive diagnosis. No, it might be that the information suggests that this might be one of the diagnoses to be considered. And then I will evaluate all the information provided and see the person multiple times. So just the way it's done clinically.
So you don't form your opinion after just seeing the person one time, or do you?
No.
Okay.
No.
Do you, when you decide to accept a case, do you do so indicating that you think it must be schizophrenia, or that you think it's possible, that you think it's likely that it's schizophrenia, or another diagnosis? Or do you say, okay, this may be a case where I may have expertise that would help you, I'm willing to see this individual, but I'm going to tell you the truth about what my clinical opinion is?
The latter, the last one. I will see the individuals, the person, and then will discuss preliminary impression and request of more information that is available, other collateral information that is available, and if I do not have the expertise, or if I think that the person doesn't have schizophrenia, I will say so.
Do you take your professional opinions and career very seriously, more seriously than any case or any specific testimony or something like that?
Absolutely. I worked very hard, and I'm dedicated to that. So my professional integrity is the most important thing. I mean, it's something that is the foundation for all scientific progress, and I apply it clinically as well.
Okay.
It's, multiple component of the same role.
Now, is it true or not that you've really only been involved in a handful of criminal cases?
Correct.
Why don't you tell us some of the criminal cases that you've been involved in? Was the earliest one back in 1991?
Correct.
And what case was that?
It was the case of Ted Kaczynski, and it came truly out of the blue. I've not been involved before, as I said, in any forensic case, and I got a call in my office from the defense lawyer in Montana, where he was arrested, and he said,
Justine.
You're not allowed to say what other people said.
Okay.
But was
And-
based on that phone call?
well, he
was-
asked me,
Hold on. You can't speak over him. You need to wait till he finishes the question, okay?
okay,
All right, ask your question. please.
Thank you, Your Honor. You can't tell us what other people said, okay? So my question is, based upon your phone call that you got, did you become involved in that case? Yes or no?
yes,
And why was that?
Overruled?
the information that I obtained from the attorney based on what the data that he gathered, and his observation was that this person his behavior is abnormal, and that from his reading of some of the literature, he went online and checked that it might be something that I can help.
Sustained.
So based upon the information that you received, whatever it was, did you believe that there was a case that you may have some specific expertise in that would assist the court or the attorneys or the jury in determining what was going on with Mr. Kaczynski?
Correct.
Now, Mr. Kaczynski, I'm sure the jury probably knows, but Mr. Kaczynski, is that the case known as the Unabomber case?
Yes.
And did Mr. Kaczynski mail various explosive packages to different individuals around the United States?
Yes.
And did this take place over a long period of time?
Yes.
Did you examine Mr. Kaczynski yourself?
Yes.
How many times do you recall?
A full day.
Okay. Just one time, or were there multiple times that you saw him?
One time.
Okay. And based upon that one time, did you reach a diagnosis in that case of what you determined Mr. Kaczynski's diagnosis was? Did you reach a diagnosis in that case?
Yes, but it was not just based on the allotted time of 1 day interview. The one time was allotted, was enabled because he was transitioned to another state. So, and at that time a different team took over and continued contact with me, but other information was provided, including his writings, interview with his brother, review of records.
Okay. So was there a lot of other information that you incorporated in the opinion that you formed about what diagnosis Mr. Kaczynski had?
Correct.
Okay. And what was the diagnosis that you opined that Mr. Kaczynski had?
Sustained.
Was that a case that you ever testified in? Did that go to trial?
There was a trial, but then it settled. So I did not testify.
Okay. Was it by settled, do you mean that there was some kind of a plea agreement that was arranged?
Correct.
Now, based upon your experience in interviews and the information you heard from Mr. Kaczynski, did that involve a considerable amount of planning on Mr. Kaczynski's part?
Correct.
Sustained to the last question and the last answer.
What, but thank you, Your Honor. What was the next case that you were involved in?
In 1999, I was asked to see Mr. Rusty Weston, who was a shooter at Capitol Hill, and I saw him one time. He was seen by many people, and I did not continue and did not discuss it orally, but did not write any report, but I saw him one time.
Now, are there times when you might reach an opinion that that the lawyer may not want to use or may not choose to call you to testify? Does that happen? What capacity did you see Mr. Weston in? Were you retained by one of the lawyers? Were you retained by the judge?
It was one of the lawyers, and many expert witnesses came in, and I was one of them. But I said you asked me for any contact that I had. This was one, but it did not. It was just one visit and discussion.
Okay. Did that case go to trial, or did you testify?
It didn't. I did not testify, and I don't believe it went to trial.
How about, were you involved in a case in 2000 called Dominique Philipposian?
Yes, I was. Dominique Philipposian was a federal case in front of a judge, not a jury, and he wounded a postal worker. And there was a question of his diagnosis and his mental status.
So was that a murder case, or was that
It was not a murder case. It was not.
And were you retained by a lawyer in that case?
I was retained by the lawyer in that case, correct.
Okay. And did you testify in that case?
Yes, I did.
And did you conduct an examination of Mr. Philipposian as well as review historical data and records and all of the like in that
Yeah.
case.
Correct. An interview of his father.
Now, were you also involved in a case called a civil case involving a person named David Halpern?
Correct.
And
Yes.
when was that, ma'am?
Trying to remember the date. It was in 2004.
Okay. And Mr. Halpern was, what was going on in that situation?
Mr. Alpern was given up for adoption by a woman who had schizophrenia and could not take care of him. And he grew up with an adoptive, loving mother and father. And he committed crimes. It was a civil case, stealing, breaking into places, and he and his adoptive parents sued the adoptive agency for not disclosing to them at the time of the adoption that his biological mother had schizophrenia. And they wanted the case to be presented that his behavior was because he has schizophrenia type features, and that this should have been disclosed before.
And did you conduct an examination of Mr. Halpern?
Correct, I did.
Did you review historical information and other records?
Correct.
And as a result, did you form an opinion that he didn't have schizophrenia and that he was just making it up?
No.
Sustained to the form of the question.
Based on your examination in that case, did you disagree with the diagnosis of schizophrenia? Disagree with what they were looking for you to say?
Sustained. Would counsel please approach? All right, Mr. King, you may proceed.
Thank you. Moving on here. 2008, a case called Billiot. You recall that case?
Yes,
Was that a murder case?
yes.
Was that a death penalty case?
It was post-conviction. It was for competency to be executed.
Okay, so did that in case involve the death penalty then?
Yes,
Did you examine Mr. Billiot?
yes,
Did you review all of the materials in the history and the documentation involved?
yes,
Was that a case that you formed an opinion in without telling us what that opinion was or diagnoses?
yes,
And did you testify in that case?
yes,
Was that case to a judge? Because you said it was in the context of competency for execution. Was that to a jury or was that to a judge?
a judge.
Finally, 2011, Yvonne Hiller. Am I
Yes.
pronouncing that correctly?
Yes,
What was that? Was that a murder case?
yes,
Was that a death penalty case or no?
was considered
Okay.
initially.
Did you examine Mrs. Hiller?
Yes, I did.
Did you evaluate all the materials in the records, and did you reach a diagnosis in that case as well?
Yes,
And did you testify in that case? Did it go to trial?
it did not go to trial.
Finally, Jared Loeffner, when was that?
2011, 2012.
And was Mr. Loeffner accused of shooting a number of people down in Tucson, Arizona?
Yes,
Including a United States, a member of Congress.
yes,
Did you do an evaluation of Mr. Loeffner by examining him?
yes,
Did you review all of the relevant materials and other history involving Mr. Loeffner and his record?
yes,
And did you, were you retained in this case by the defense lawyer?
yes,
Did you form an opinion about what diagnosis Mr. Loeffner had?
yes,
And did you form an opinion without telling us what it is about sanity?
yes.
Did you testify in that case, or did that case not go to trial?
Did not go to trial.
Did you testify or provide information to the federal government in that case about what your findings had been, though?
Not in. I provided a report, but
Okay.
I don't know if it went to the federal government or how they worked it.
Okay, that was a federal case, is that right?
Yes,
It was prosecuted in federal court?
yes,
Okay. And did it eventually reach a settlement?
yes,
And that's really the cases that you worked on. Is that fair?
yes,
Now, it sounds like in every case that you've told us about, just this handful of cases, that you've, in every situation, been retained by the defense lawyer. Is that right?
yes.
Never been hired by a prosecutor. Is that right?
Never been contacted.
Have you ever been contacted by a court to do an evaluation?
No.
And why? Why is that that's the defense in those cases? Do you know?
Sustained. You can rephrase your question.
Do you know why you have only worked for the defense on those cases?
The number of cases, as I said before, that I've been involved is limited, and I've not. I mean, nobody, my name is not in the circle of forensic psychiatrists, but more as an academician who is doing brain behavior research on schizophrenia and teaching and clinical work related to schizophrenia.
Okay.
I mean, I did not solicit the defense to contact me.
Good. So they contacted you?
Yes.
Now, due to the fact that you've worked for defense lawyers, does that mean you have some kind of bias against prosecutors or against the death penalty or in favor of criminal defendants?
No, I don't.
In all of those circumstances, did you apply your skills and your clinical judgment to the best of your ability and render your opinions as clearly and as honestly as you could?
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit then about schizophrenia spectrum disorders, if we could, as this is your area of expertise. Can I please have slide 1? Did you prepare some slides to help explain your testimony to this jury with regard to some of these issues?
Yes, I did.
Do you think it would be helpful to show those slides to accompany your testimony to illustrate some of these points?
I hope so.
Can I have slide 1, please? What's the purpose of this slide? What's schizophrenia complex brain disorder? Can you explain this to us, please? What this means?
That as a syndrome, when we think about schizophrenia, it is a complex, not a simple presentation of a dysfunctional brain.
Okay.
And that there are multiple components that are commonly considered when discussing schizophrenia in the literature and in evaluating a person when schizophrenia is considered as a diagnosis. So some disorders are more simple. Schizophrenia affects almost, not in all cases, but almost every human behavior. So some disorders can affect one component of behavior. Schizophrenia affects almost everything that is unique to us as human beings. And that when we think about brain disorders, some brain disorders, it's complex. Some brain disorders are focal. There's one part of the brain that is abnormal. And it can be, for example, a very small stroke, not in an important brain region, what we many times call a silent stroke, and the person will not even be aware of it. Here, it affects the brain in totality. So it's multiple brain regions that can be affected. And therefore, the presentation, when we see somebody, is complex. It's not just one thing that is going wrong or is abnormal, but multiple components of behavior are affected.
Now you said dysfunctional brain, I think.
Uh-huh.
What do you mean by dysfunctional brain?
Well, we think about that the brain has capacity to process information that we obtain through our senses, through vision, through our eyes, auditory through our ears, tactile through our hands, smell, olfactory through our nose, multiple, touch, through our skin, multiple sources of information are coming into the brain all the time. The brain integrates the information, and there are unique systems in the brain that get the information, integrate it, and then act. We behave. This process is complex, multifaceted, and when I say dysfunctional, is that the brain, when dysfunctional, the integrity of processing the information and behaving is disrupted, and the behavior schizophrenia is a severe, complex brain disorder, and hence the title.
Okay. Now we've had some testimony about this book right here, quite a bit in this case thus far. What is this?
It's the last, most recent version of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, number 5. The American Psychiatric Association, every few years, sometimes it takes a decade, reviews the state of knowledge and the literature across psychiatric disorders, and to do that establishes expert teams that meet in Washington, D.C. and work as groups for different disorders and sometimes across disorders, and reach consensus that then is published and presented to the psychiatric and mental health community with the support of the American Psychiatric Association.
Okay. Were you asked to be part of the work group to write the section on schizophrenia spectrum disorders and other psychotic illness?
Yes, I was.
And did you participate in that process and do that work?
For almost 4 years.
Now there are there not, or are there, in this collection of diagnoses, some diagnoses that relate solely to behaviors or personality traits?
Yes, there are.
Can you give us an example of some of those, or a couple of those?
So there are, may I ask, in relationship to schizophrenia or any
Yes,
other
in relationship to
domain?
schizophrenia. That's exactly what I'm asking. And,
Yeah,
and perhaps
so-
if I'm asking a bad question, is probably what's going on here. Is there a difference between a brain disease, as you're describing schizophrenia to be, and some of the other diagnoses in this book, which may pertain more to clinical disorders or personality problems or things along those lines?
So there can be differences between schizophrenia and other disorders. With regarding to the complexity or the level of knowledge that we have on the impact of the disorder on the brain. So we know more, schizophrenia is investigated more than other disorder in relationship to the brain. Others are gaining, but schizophrenia was the first that a lot of effort went to advance the understanding as a brain disorder.
Is a personality disorder, like antisocial personality disorder, for example, a brain disease in the same way schizophrenia is? Or is that more a personality trait or a certain set of personality traits?
So it is a personality the example that you gave is a personality trait, but there's research that is conducted on people with antisocial personality that is different from schizophrenia that suggests that there might be some brain differences from healthy people, but it is not the extent of and the complexity of schizophrenia.
Okay. Are all of the diagnoses in this book then related to some kind of brain disease then, some kind of organic cause in the brain?
There's variability in the extent of documented and strong evidence across all of the disorders, but this is one of the efforts in psychiatry now, is to advance with new tools being available that were not available before, is to advance the understanding. So even, for example, you asked for an example, in eating disorder, there's now an increase in knowledge to show what is the biology of eating disorder.
Understood. So there's a biological basis for all of the disorders in some sense? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, does someone choose schizophrenia, to get schizophrenia?
No, I don't believe so.
Does someone get schizophrenia because they have bad habits?
No.
Does someone get schizophrenia because they have a bad attitude?
No.
Do people get schizophrenia because they're lazy?
No.
Does schizophrenia affect the way the brain works on a fundamental level?
Yes, it does.
How so?
It affects, if I try to divide it into two major domains, it affects cognitive abilities that relate to thinking, to the ability to for rational decision making, for learning, for memory, for mental flexibility, switching gears. Many times in life we encounter situations that we are blocked, we cannot do something. How do we go about going around it and solving it, being creative about obstacle? It affects this, so there's more rigidity and repetitiveness of the same activities. And it affects, and this is more a recent advancement in the study of schizophrenia, it affects emotion processing. Many times we focus on cognition. That's, what we are used to. That's what many times we measure. That's why we evaluate kids, readiness in reading, writing. Schizophrenia affects emotion processing, the ability to perceive emotions on the face of people that 2- and 3-year-olds can do, the ability to relate to other people, put oneself in their shoes, in a very fundamental way. So it's both cognition and emotion that are affected. So it affects multiple domain and also functioning.
Okay. Would it assist your testimony about what the schizophrenia spectrum disorders are and what the key features are and the diagnostic criteria to be able to show some of the definitions from the diagnostic manual to the jury?
Yes.
Your Honor, if I may, could I publish, do we have the ability to publish an exhibit just to the witness and to the court first for approval?
Okay.
I'd like to, if I could, have what is, I think it's our internal number 2622, which is page 87 of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. Is that shown on your screen up there, ma'am?
Yes, it does.
Is that an accurate copy of page of the
87, yeah.
the beginning of the chapter that you helped to write?
Yes.
Would it help you in your testimony to describe what the schizophrenia spectrum disorders are, the key features of those disorders, to be able to display this to the jury?
So a decision was made after extensive deliberation to put it as spectrum and combine, because many times there are overlapping clinical features that present, and therefore to include schizophrenia spectrum disorder to cover several disorders that share a commonality, rather than to consider each one just entirely individual and not under one umbrella. So that's why it's called schizophrenia spectrum disorder. And
Doctor? Would it assist your testimony to show this page to the jury so that you could testify about it?
Okay. Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, may I do that?
Is there any objection? No. Yes, go ahead, Mr. King.
Thank you. Ma'am? And if, ma'am, you could call out the top paragraph there, schizophrenia spectrum.
So just as I said...
Hold on. There's not a question.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. King, ask your question.
Schizophrenia spectrum disorder, what disorders does that include in that spectrum?
So it includes also schizotypal personality disorder, schizoaffective disorder, schizophreniform disorder, brief psychosis, all fall within the spectrum.
Okay. And are those all psychotic disorders?
They're all psychotic disorders, yes.
And how does this relate to what you were telling us before about the spectrum of disorders and why they were combined together in this chapter?
In the approach to diagnosis, because there are common features, it is important to consider that there can be overlap in the features and that it's important to put them under one umbrella rather than to split it continuously. It's just a frame of evaluating a patient and considering the range of the disorder that fall within the spectrum. It's more efficient, more comprehensive, and clinically more relevant in the presentation.
Are they all interrelated in that they all have similar features?
There are similar features, yes.
And what are the similar features as described in this paragraph here?
So there can be delusions, which are false beliefs, can be hallucinations, which are false perceptions, commonly can be in the auditory, hearing, or less commonly visual, less commonly olfactory, smell, or tactile, touch. So these are, what I mean by hallucinations is that the false perception is that another person who has been standing or sitting next to the person who has the experience of seeing something or hearing something will not have this experience. So there's nothing there in the real world, in reality, that produces the perception. There's no stimulus there, but the person who has hallucinations, their brain produces a visual or an auditory percept. It's like they've seen something or heard something and they might respond to it to check if it's really there. So
Now,
that's hallucinations.
Okay. With regard to hallucinations, you said that it's something that's a perception that's not really there. How does that appear to the person experiencing the hallucination? In other words, is it as real as anything else that you experience to them?
To them, yes. It will depend on the degree of the severity of illness and There are multiple other factors, but they believe that they see something or hear something and they respond to it.
How about delusions? You said delusions are fixed beliefs. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Delusions are false beliefs. So this is a belief system that a person will develop over time, and commonly over time it becomes more and more complex and engulfing their experiences. If I see a person with a delusion that is well formed, it doesn't happen overnight. It's something that it's a process that can take years, months or years to form. And the belief, the stronger for some people, the stronger it becomes, the more of a dominant force it is in their life. So their thoughts, their actions are dominated by the belief. And the belief can be very different for different people at time, but the belief is not shared by other people. So if it's shared, commonly with other people, some beliefs that relate to health or to religion, this is not a delusion, but a belief that is not based in reality, and it engulfs the person's life and dictates in any way things that they do can become a dominant force. I mean, I can give you many examples of that, but
Okay.
if it's not clear.
Give us an example.
Well, I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example of a person I saw several years ago, and his belief was that the government is poisoning the water in his faucet. And it did not develop overnight. It slowly developed from the water doesn't taste as good to, is it only in my case or in the case of the neighbors too? So beginning to check with the neighbors and comparing the taste of the water, his water and the neighbor's water, talking to his parents about it, and the parents saying nothing has changed with the water, checking with the municipality if they are now getting water from another resource, and relocating to avoid the water, and believing that the water, and this occurred over years, believing that the water that locally they're trying to send to the other side, the water that is poisoned. And every experience that he had, this is an extreme example, but to make the point that every experience that he had was related, health issues that he was experiencing were related to the water. And the reason I saw him was that he was referred by medicine, because he will come to medicine and will say that my fingernails are changing. And they will check him out and nothing happened there. My earlobes are changing, until they realized after several visits that every time it's something else and that there's no medical basis for it. So a colleague in medicine called me and asked me to see him. And it took some investigation to find out the story about the water, because he wasn't revealing it. So this was driving his total life. He gave up his job, he relocated because of an extreme delusion. In most cases, it will not be as extreme. But it's based on a false belief.
Now, is a delusion apparent to others that are around him? Like that example you gave, were other people aware that this person thought this way, or did he appear normal otherwise?
He appeared normal. He was holding a job. He was driving a car. He was dating. He appeared normal until he began, when his parents thought that maybe the water is being changed, and they checked if they're working in the area or what, until he came to medical attention repeatedly. And they asked me to see him. And it took a while for him to disclose the water. And he brought from his car a bottle of water for me to taste, to realize that, and tell him that the water is different. And of course it wasn't.
Your Honor, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say we're going to stop. Thank you. All right, members of the jury, it's a little bit after 5. Please make sure you follow all my admonishments overnight. They're all extremely important, and I'll see you back here at the usual time tomorrow morning at 8:40, okay? Thank you very much. The record should reflect that the jury has exited the courtroom. Everyone may be seated. Is there anything that we need to talk about at this time on behalf of the people?
No, Your Honor.
On behalf of the defense?
No, Judge, other than I was going to mark that these,
Yes.
as a court's exhibit, we ran out of toner, and so we couldn't print all the pages.
Okay.
But so I'll ask to do that tomorrow morning if that's okay with the court.
That's fine. All right, and what number are we up to now, court trial exhibits?
Number is 83.
83, Mr. King.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. All right, folks, have a good evening, doctor. Have a good evening. Your subpoenas continue until tomorrow, okay?
Your Honor? I'm
Yes.
sorry. Mr. Orman went for the microphone and then got freaked out when you stood up. I'll do it.
Are you sure? Okay. All right, have a good night, everyone. Court will be in recess.
Please rise.